here to destroy that tower.
Quantum Theory is a Japanese-developed game utilizing the cover-based third-person shooter mechanics popularized by Gears of War. The game isn't shy about borrowing, going well past the level of formal similarity to Marcus Phoenix and his merry band of cogs. Do its scant, unique ideas save the experience, or is Quantum Theory just a cheap clone in the end? In this dark sci-fi world, a seemingly sentient substance known as Diablosis has created living towers of nastiness that spawn legions of bad guys and turn regular soldiers into mindless minions. Humanity is looking pretty screwed. Lucky for us, protagonist Sid is hell-bent on addressing the problem at its source. He meets a fellow ass-kicker and a woman named Felina, who has some mysterious connection to the tower. It's not the worst setup, honestly, but the game teases you along with vague objectives and awkward dialogue before hitting you with playable flashbacks that expound upon your motivation. The second-rate sci-fi is actually just as interesting as most other game stories involving buffed-up dudes fighting humanoid but thoroughly inhuman monsters, at least in theory. It's just that the inconsistent presentation makes it that much harder to care. Your journey to the top of the tower takes you ever upward through a number of anatomically named environments, and your job is to eliminate any and all opposition while dealing with the warping and twisting environments. The game follows the typical third-person shooter script, starting you out with a limited weapon selection and only a couple of enemy types to keep you busy. It's understandable to start with the basics, but the game often feels reluctant to introduce new elements. As you accumulate a larger arsenal and face new foes, the game is slowly able to come up with a few diversions that keep it from feeling like a total slog. It's unfortunate that these different types of activities are, like the rest of the game, uneven and unrefined. Some sequences see you riding a piece of terrain through the air, but whether or not you manage to tame your wild crosshair and actually kill enemies is almost beside the point. Sometimes you're on rails, but other times you may be unsure where the ride is supposed to end. There are also a few major enemies blocking your way, challenging your shooting and dodging skills with their own mobility and powerful attacks. But inadequate visual feedback and a lack of creativity keep these fights from being true high points. In fact, the game's torturous final boss is without question Quantum Theory's nadir.
Next victim.
The variety of different weapons to wield in Quantum Theory is actually a strong point. Sid always carries his signature weapon, a heavy pistol with a face that does extra damage when you hit an enemy's weak point. You'll find a lot of optional weapons that feel different and more powerful than your old guns, and you'll have a lot of choice over which two you take with you. You'll find a few good weapons in the mix, plus a handful of decent ones, and one or two that are total crap.
I'm gonna light this place up.
In the absence of a highly tuned and polished core of death-dealing options, it's nice to have some degree of choice.
Damn it, they're everywhere.
Quantum Theory doesn't often achieve unqualified success, but it does make some sort of effort on almost every front. The game's multiplayer mode isn't AAA caliber, but it is surprisingly decent due to well-designed maps, as well as your ability to immediately select and use a powerful secondary weapon every time you begin a match, or respawn after being killed. The game offers free-for-alls, team deathmatch, and a VIP mode called Guardian. Just keep in mind that you'll have one likely fatal obstacle keeping you from having fun with this mode. This is a weak game in a genre crowded with greats, so don't expect to find many people playing online. Quantum Theory directly and shamelessly mimics the control scheme and feel of Gears of War, with only a few minor differences, to pretty good effect. The deficiencies, however, are in the details. Characters lack weight and momentum to give them a solid feel, and aiming feels touchy. Firing your weapons just doesn't convey an appropriate sense of power, and small touches like Active Reload, the brilliant Gears microgame that lets you reload faster and potentially gain a small damage boost, are absent. You'll be assaulted from many angles, which can feel like a challenge or an unfair annoyance depending on your mindset. But there's no question that the game visibly cheats to make this happen. Quantum Theory's somewhat underutilized shifting terrain trick creates one or two genuinely interesting firefights, but things feel less dynamic when enemies cheaply pipe in from previously closed doors or breach invisible walls to pour on pressure.
Damn it, they're everywhere.
Your most powerful weapon is your lovely sidekick Felina, who you can toss at enemies to either stun them from above or deal big, messy damage from the front. Felina can also supplement your normal melee attack to create damaging combos, which works well for quickly taking out enemies. Your throwable partner is certainly fun to use, but too often she simply feels like one more weapon option. She's not integrated deeply enough into the core mechanics to add any real flavor to the otherwise generic and derivative gameplay. Quantum Theory doesn't do itself any favors by biting a large chunk of its style from a technically superior game. The light coat of anime styling fails to earn it a distinctive visual identity. The game simply looks dated, and even when it does succeed in coming up with an interesting environment or enemy, it'll appear blurry, blocky, fuzzy, or simply not that great. While the game revels in messy headshots, the popping effect used for exploding enemies is almost comically inadequate. Sometimes it's not enough, other times you get too much. The slight pause for a headshot can lose its impact and even become tiresome when you score several in a row. And the CG cutscenes just can't resist calling on overly dramatic slow motion time and time again. Finally, while most of the dialogue is awkward but workable, some of Sid's one-liners are painfully dumb and juvenile.
Breaking things always works.
As a developer's first crack at a new genre, it's not surprising that the game has a few lessons to learn. But just because Quantum Theory isn't an awful game, doesn't mean it's a good one. Flawed, unoriginal, and dated, it's tough to look past its failings. If you have a deep and powerful hunger for a Gears-like game with a slightly different aesthetic, or you're simply curious to see a budget-restricted team from Japan take on a Western-dominated genre, by all means have a look. Just make sure you don't approach the game looking for solid entertainment. Sid does not have your back on that one.